The day respect was denied. The crystal chandeliers of the Elysium Grand Hall shimmered like frozen stars, reflecting off marble floors polished to perfection. Every detail screamed wealth: gold-trimmed chairs, ivory tablecloths imported from Italy, towering floral arrangements dripping with white orchids and roses. It was the kind of wedding people talked about for years. Luxury had a sound too. The soft hum of live string instruments. The clinking of champagne glasses. The polite laughter of guests dressed in designer suits and gowns. And yet, beneath all that beauty, something ugly was already unfolding. Margaret Johnson stood near the entrance, smoothing the sleeves of her elegant navy blue gown. She was not overdressed, nor was she trying to stand out, but grace followed her naturally. Her silver-streaked hair was styled neatly into a low bun, her posture calm, dignified. Anyone who looked closely would see a woman used to carrying responsibility without noise. This was her daughter's wedding. Her youngest child. Vanessa Johnson. Margaret's eyes softened as she watched Vanessa across the hall, radiant in a custom-made silk gown that hugged her perfectly. The dress alone cost more than most cars, but Margaret had paid for it without complaint. For her, love had never been measured in receipts. Vanessa laughed as bridesmaids adjusted her veil, unaware of the tension creeping closer like a slow shadow. Across the hall, the Holloway family gathered like royalty claiming a throne. Charles Holloway, the groom's father, stood tall in a tailored charcoal suit, his gold cufflinks flashing whenever he gestured. His wife, Lorraine Holloway, examined the hall with sharp eyes, lips pursed in thin satisfaction. "This place is impressive," Lorraine said coolly. "I told you, our family doesn't do small events." Charles nodded. "As expected. We don't associate with mediocrity." They believed this wedding was a testament to their status. What they didn't know, what they never asked, was who truly made it possible. Margaret approached slowly, intending only to greet them politely. She had rehearsed nothing. She carried no bitterness. She believed respect could still be mutual. "Good evening," Margaret said gently. "I'm Vanessa's mother. I wanted to welcome you properly." Lorraine's eyes flicked over Margaret, from her shoes to her hair, then dismissed her. "We're a bit busy," Lorraine replied. "The ceremony is about to begin." Margaret smiled faintly. "Of course. Before she could finish, Charles stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said sharply. "Who exactly invited you to stand here?" The words hit harder than a slap. Margaret blinked. "I'm the bride's mother." Lorraine laughed, short, humorless. "That explains it," she said. "We were wondering where the other side was." Margaret's chest tightened, but her voice remained steady. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," Lorraine said plainly. "You're confusing familiarity with relevance." A few nearby guests turned their heads. "This wedding is being managed by our family," Charles continued. "We prefer things orderly. Parents of the bride usually remain seated unless invited forward." Margaret glanced around. "I was just welcoming you." Lorraine leaned closer, her smile cold. "You should be grateful you're even here." Silence fell between them, thick, uncomfortable. Then came the final blow. "I don't know what arrangement you think exists," Lorraine said, "but let's be clear, this wedding is not yours." Margaret inhaled slowly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Charles waved a dismissive hand. "Security." Two men in black suits approached immediately. Lorraine pointed toward the doors. "Escort her outside," she said. "She's causing unnecessary confusion." Margaret's heart pounded, but she did not raise her voice. "Please," she said quietly. "This is my daughter's wedding." Lorraine's eyes hardened. "Exactly why you should know your place." Gasps rippled through nearby guests. Vanessa, across the hall, turned just in time to see her mother being gently, but firmly, guided toward the exit. Her smile vanished. "Mom," she whispered. Margaret did not struggle. She did not shout. She walked with dignity, head high, steps measured, as the massive doors closed behind her. Outside, The cool evening air kissed her face. Inside, champagne continued to flow. And not a single person from the Holloway family knew the truth. The land beneath their feet. The hall they stood in. The lights above their heads. The music echoing through the walls. Every dollar spent on that wedding belonged to the woman they had just thrown out. Margaret Johnson paused at the bottom of the steps, reached into her clutch, and slowly pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over one contact. She exhaled once and pressed call. Margaret Johnson stood beneath the soft glow of the exterior lights of the Elysium Grand Hall, the same lights she had personally approved during construction 3 years earlier. At night, they cast a warm golden sheen over the glass walls and manicured hedges, making the building look like a palace suspended between elegance and power. Power. That word sat heavily in her chest, not as pride, but as responsibility. Her phone rang once before the call connected. "Yes, Mrs. Johnson," a calm male voice answered. "Is everything all right?" Margaret straightened her shoulders. "No, Daniel. Everything is not." Daniel Brooks was not just any manager. He was the operations director of Elysium Properties, a luxury real estate and events company quietly owned by Margaret Johnson. To the public, her name was never attached. To the staff, however, she was known as the principal. "I need you to come to the main hall immediately," Margaret said, "and bring the legal liaison." There was a pause, just long enough to signal something serious. "I'll be there in 5 minutes," Daniel replied. "Do you want me to halt the event?" Margaret looked back through the glass doors. She could see guests laughing. See Lorraine Holloway holding court, basking in admiration. See Vanessa being led toward the altar, confusion clouding her joy. "Not yet," Margaret said softly. "Let it continue." She ended the call and sat on one of the stone benches near the entrance. The cool surface pressed against her palms as memories flooded her mind. She remembered the years after her husband passed away. The sleepless nights. The sacrifices. How she built everything from scratch, investments, properties, partnerships, so her children would never be dependent on anyone's arrogance. She had raised Vanessa to be gentle, but she had raised herself to be prepared. Inside the hall, Vanessa whispered urgently to her maid of honor. "Where's my mother?" The maid of honor frowned. "I thought she stepped outside." Vanessa's stomach twisted. She scanned the room, panic rising. She spotted her new in-laws laughing comfortably, completely unbothered. She approached her husband, Malcolm Holloway, whose tailored tuxedo hid the tension in his shoulders. "Malcolm," she whispered, "did you see my mom?" Malcolm hesitated. My mother said she was handled." Vanessa froze. "Handled how?" Before he could answer, Lorraine appeared beside them like a summoned storm. "Sweetheart," Lorraine said brightly, adjusting Vanessa's veil without permission, "everything is under control. Let's focus on your big moment." Vanessa pulled back. "Where is my mother?" Lorraine's smile thinned. She stepped out. "These things happen." "What things?" Vanessa demanded. Charles cleared his throat. "Vanessa, this isn't the time. Guests are waiting." Vanessa looked from one face to another. Something was very wrong. Outside, a sleek black SUV rolled quietly into the private parking area. Daniel Brooks stepped out, his presence commanding without theatrics. Behind him came Angela Moore, a sharp-eyed attorney in a tailored cream suit, carrying a leather folder pressed firmly to her chest. They spotted Margaret immediately. Daniel's face tightened. "Mrs. Johnson, what happened?" Margaret rose slowly. "I was removed from my daughter's wedding." Angela's eyebrows lifted. "Removed?" Daniel looked toward the glass doors. "By whom?" Margaret met his eyes. "The groom's family." Silence fell. Daniel exhaled through his teeth. "They removed the owner from her own property." Angela opened her folder. "Do you want this documented?" "Yes," Margaret replied calmly. "Every word, every action." Inside the hall, The officiant cleared his throat. "We are gathered here today." The doors opened. Daniel and Angela stepped inside, flanked by two senior hall supervisors. Their presence was immediate. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Lorraine's smile faded. "Excuse me," she snapped. "Who are you?" Daniel didn't answer her. He walked straight toward the center aisle and addressed the officiant. "I'm sorry," he said firmly. "We need to pause the ceremony." Gasps rippled through the room. Charles stepped forward angrily. "You can't just interrupt. Do you know who we are?" Daniel finally looked at him. "Yes," he said evenly. "And I know exactly where you are." Lorraine scoffed. "This hall was booked under our family name." Angela stepped forward. "Actually, it was booked under Johnson Holdings, with full ownership rights retained." Lorraine laughed nervously. "That's irrelevant." Daniel turned slightly. "Mrs. Johnson," he said loudly, respectfully, "would you like to come inside now?" Every head snapped toward the entrance. Margaret walked in. The room went silent. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. "Mom." Margaret met her daughter's eyes, warmth shining through calm authority. "I'm here, baby." Lorraine's face drained of color. Charles swallowed hard. Malcolm stared, confused and shaken. Angela opened her folder. "For the record," she said clearly, "this event hall, its land, and all associated services are fully owned by Margaret Elise Johnson." A stunned hush fell over the room. Lorraine whispered, "That's not possible." Margaret smiled gently. "Oh," she said, "it very much is." The silence inside the Elysium Grand Hall was no longer polite. It was heavy, suffocating, and sharp enough to cut through crystal and ego alike. Lorraine Holloway's lips parted, but no sound came out. Charles Holloway adjusted his suit jacket, suddenly aware that the weight he once carried in the room had evaporated. Eyes that once admired him now studied him with curiosity, and something close to judgment. Margaret Johnson stood tall at the center aisle, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She wasn't smiling out of triumph. She wasn't angry. She looked like a woman who had nothing left to explain. Vanessa rushed forward, tears forming in her eyes. "Mom, what is happening?" Margaret reached for her daughter's hands and squeezed them gently. "Nothing that can't be handled with truth." Lorraine snapped out of her shock and found her voice. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply. "You're trying to embarrass us on our son's wedding day." Angela Moore didn't flinch. "No, ma'am. Your actions did that." Murmurs spread like wildfire. A guest whispered, "She owns the place?" Another replied, "The whole hall." "Quiet!" Charles barked, trying to regain control. "This is a misunderstanding. We paid for this wedding." Margaret finally spoke. "You paid vendors," she said softly. "I paid for the foundation that makes this building stand." Daniel Brooks stepped forward, holding a digital tablet. "For clarity," he said, "this property was developed under Johnson Holdings. Mrs. Johnson financed its construction, owns the deed, and personally approved tonight's booking, at a family rate." A few guests gasped. Lorraine's face burned. "You expect us to believe this woman owns all of this?" Margaret turned toward her, voice steady. "You never asked," she said. "You only assumed." That stung deeper than any insult. Vanessa looked from her mother to her in-laws, realization washing over her. "You threw my mother out," she said, her voice trembling, "without knowing who she was?" Lorraine straightened. "We removed a disruption." "A disruption?" Vanessa repeated. "She raised me. She paid for this wedding." The room held its breath. Malcolm stepped forward slowly, his voice uncertain. "Mom, Dad, is that true?" Charles clenched his jaw. "We didn't know," Lorraine muttered. "She didn't look like." She stopped herself too late. Margaret raised an eyebrow slightly. "Like money." The unspoken truth echoed loudly. Angela cleared her throat. "Mrs. Johnson, How would you like to proceed? Every eye turned to Margaret. She could shut the wedding down, cancel the event, revoke access, humiliate them publicly the way they had humiliated her. But power didn't always need noise. Margaret looked at Vanessa, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Do you want to continue?" she asked her daughter quietly. Vanessa nodded, though her heart was pounding. "Yes, but not like this." Margaret turned back to Angela. "The ceremony can continue," she said, "but I want one condition met." Lorraine's head snapped up. "You don't get to dictate." Daniel interrupted, firm. "She absolutely does." Margaret's voice didn't rise. "The Holloway family will apologize," she said, publicly. "And my daughter will never again be treated as less than because you believe wealth makes you superior." The room was still. Lorraine's pride battled her fear. Charles whispered harshly, "Just say it." Lorraine's jaw tightened. Slowly, she turned toward Margaret. "I apologize," she said stiffly, "for the misunderstanding." Margaret shook her head gently. "No. For the disrespect." Lorraine swallowed hard. "For the disrespect." Vanessa exhaled shakily. Margaret nodded once. "Thank you." She stepped back, giving space. The officiant cleared his throat again, hands trembling slightly. "Shall we continue?" The music resumed, softer now, different. As Vanessa walked down the aisle, her steps were slower, but stronger. Her eyes never left her mother's. But beneath the surface calm, something had shifted. The Holloways had lost control. And Margaret Johnson hadn't even begun to speak her full truth. The vows were spoken. The rings were exchanged. Applause filled the Elysium Grand Hall once again. But the celebration had changed. Luxury no longer felt warm, it felt exposed. As guests moved toward the reception area, whispers followed them like shadows. Glasses clinked, smiles appeared for photos, but nothing could erase what had already been seen. Power had shifted publicly, and everyone knew it. Vanessa sat beside Malcolm at the head table, her posture elegant, her expression composed. Yet inside, her heart was racing. Every laugh from the Holloway side sounded forced. Every compliment felt hollow. She glanced at her mother across the room. Margaret sat with quiet dignity, speaking calmly with a few guests who had suddenly discovered deep respect. People who hadn't noticed her before now leaned in, eager to be heard. Lorraine watched from across the hall, her hands trembling as she lifted her wineglass. "They're looking at her like she's royalty," she muttered to Charles. Watch out for the next chapter on this same channel, Mira Wealth Stories. In the next episode, we'll uncover what truly happened to both families. Did they settle their differences? Or did distance become the final decision? Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Turn on your notification bell so you won't miss the next episode. Thank you for watching.